You were never supposed to notice the thin pulse behind perception. It hides between the blink and the thought, behind the illusion that sight belongs to the eyes. One instant too aware, and the world begins to flicker, its solidity trembling under the weight of your attention. Something in you steps out of the scene, observing the observer, sensing that reality depends on this invisible act of seeing. What you were never meant to see is not forbidden. It is too close, too intimate. The moment you glimpse it, the script of existence hesitates, waiting for you to decide whether to keep pretending or to finally wake up. The first fracture in unconscious seeing doesn't feel like enlightenment. It feels like disorientation, like the world has lost its automatic rhythm, and every sound, gesture, and detail now demands something from you. The mind searches for stability, but the moment you begin to look without reacting, the familiar structures start to unravel. You start to sense that attention isn't passive. It doesn't just record the world, it animates it. A cup on the table, the sound of your own breathing, the faint vibration in your chest, all of them exist because something within you insists on noticing. When that noticing becomes still, free from judgment or urgency, the objects seem to lose their separation. The cup isn't merely a cup, it's a field of awareness folded into form. The breath isn't just air, it's movement inside the same invisible fabric that holds your thoughts together. Reality stops being a collection of things and starts behaving like an ongoing act of observation. You begin to recognize that what you called attention was never neutral. Every reaction, every label, every desire to fix or explain was a command shaping the world around you. The mind was a restless painter, covering the raw canvas of perception with its interpretations. But when the brush stills, something extraordinary happens. The painting begins to reveal the painter. At first, this stillness feels unnatural, almost intrusive. The mind protests, whispering that it must comment, that silence equals danger. But silence isn't the absence of thought, it's the atmosphere where creation becomes visible. In that silence, the smallest perception blooms into vastness. A shadow across the floor feels alive. The air itself seems to listen. This isn't imagination. It's contact with the architecture of consciousness, the place where observation and creation merge. Think of attention as light. For most of life, it's scattered, diffused across countless distractions. But when it focuses, even slightly, its intensity reshapes the scene. The same light that exposes also generates. The world you see is the residue of how that light has been used, how often it's been scattered by fear or sharpened by clarity. Every act of focused seeing rewrites the geometry of your experience. You may notice the subtle resistance that rises in the body, a tightening in the throat, a flutter in the stomach. That resistance is the echo of identification, the old habit of believing that you are the one being observed, not the one observing. It's the residue of years spent reacting instead of creating. To observe consciously is to dissolve that reflex, to step out of the feedback loop where perception triggers defense and defense reshapes perception. In this new seeing, time behaves differently. The mind measures moments, but awareness doesn't. The present ceases to be a point between past and future. It becomes a living field. Within it, attention flows like current through water, forming patterns of coherence where chaos once ruled. You start to witness how your inner frequency organizes the outer world. Calm attention stabilizes events. Frantic attention multiplies noise. Every sound becomes instruction. Every movement, mirror. You realize that seeing isn't just visual, it's a total act of participation. The universe isn't performing for you, it's responding to the tone of your awareness. The gaze is not a passive lens, it's an active dialogue, shaping what it beholds. There's a kind of humility that grows here. You see how much of your life was automatic, governed by inherited reactions, emotional echoes, unfinished thoughts. Yet, within that humility, a deeper intelligence awakens, the intelligence of pure observation. It doesn't analyze or divide, it knows by being with. It transforms without effort. At this depth, attention becomes the origin of form. Every contour of the world, the face of a stranger, the rhythm of a conversation, the movement of clouds, emerges from the same silent witness. The realization is both liberating and unsettling. Nothing exists independently of your seeing. The observer doesn't simply interpret the world, it calls it into coherence. The conscious gaze is not mystical, it's practical. It means entering each moment without the armor of expectation, meeting what arises as if for the first time. This kind of seeing restores the lost dialogue between being and becoming. You no longer stare through life, you participate in the making of it. The more you hold this awareness, the more transparent things become. The walls of identity begin to soften. The body feels lighter, not because it has changed, but because it's no longer bearing the weight of unconscious reaction. You sense a quiet order beneath appearances, as if everything is aligning to a deeper intelligence that's been waiting for you to notice. Creation no longer feels like something that happens elsewhere, in art, in science, in the actions of others. It happens here, in this precise alignment of perception and silence. To see without reacting is to allow reality to self-correct. The distortions of fear, memory, and expectation fall away, leaving only the luminous simplicity of being aware. And in that simplicity, something irreversible begins. You recognize that observation itself is the first creative act, the spark that calls existence into form. What was once background now becomes the source. You realize the observer has always been the artist, the scientist, the lover, the architect of every reality ever witnessed. The gaze that once sought meaning outside now discovers that it has been meaning all along. The first crack appears not in the world, but in you. The story you've been living in suddenly slips, and something behind your thoughts watches the fall with eerie calm. You catch yourself observing the mind as it tries to repair the break, as if afraid of what might escape through it. That quiet watcher has no history, no name, no hunger for control, and yet it feels more real than the entire architecture of your personality. You stand at the threshold between the seen and the seer. Everything you once called me is exposed as movement across a screen. Thoughts flash like lightning. Emotions rise and collapse like waves, and behind it all, untouched, an immense stillness observes. This stillness doesn't belong to the person belongs to it. The discovery is not mystical, it's too direct for that. It's the simple realization that you were never inside the film. You were the light projecting it. The mind panics at this reversal. It wants to reclaim center stage, to explain, categorize, reassert its importance. But its words slide off the surface of awareness like rain on glass. You can almost sense its exhaustion, the machinery of self-description grinding to a halt. Every justification sounds hollow. The part that used to narrate your life is now being narrated by something it cannot touch. Silence begins to form around every thought. It's not absence, it's presence so full that words dissolve inside it. You feel thought arise, and yet it no longer defines you. You feel emotion swell, but it no longer claims you. The observer doesn't resist or intervene. It simply allows, revealing that allowing itself is the purest form of intelligence. This awakening doesn't come dressed as light or ecstasy. It arrives as precision. The edges of things sharpen. The distinction between you and the seen thins until perception feels circular, everything seeing everything else. The mind loses its familiar scaffolding of separation. There is no inside or outside, only the awareness that holds both. You start to see how personal identity was a mask carved out of memory. Every belief, every story, every reaction was designed to sustain its shape. Now that shape becomes transparent. Through it you glimpse the watcher that has never moved. It watched the child, the dreamer, the seeker, and the skeptic with equal patience. It watched your victories and failures with the same still gaze. It has no opinion about any of them. It only knows itself by witnessing. This recognition feels both liberating and destabilizing. The body moves, the mouth speaks, but something in you knows that it's not the doer. Actions unfold on their own, words form without deliberate thought, and a quiet amusement runs through it all. You are no longer trying to control the scene because you finally see that you were never in it. The world happens inside the awareness that you are, like weather inside the sky. The mind calls it detachment, but it's not. It's intimacy without possession. You touch life directly now, without filters, without stories. Every moment feels like the first moment of creation. The simplest things reveal impossible beauty, the reflection on water, the rhythm of breathing, the brief silence between sounds. Awareness tastes its own depth through the ordinary. Fear occasionally returns. The personality trembles, unsure of its purpose. Without the familiar drama, it asks, "Who am I now?" The question floats unanswered, then fades because the one who asked was never real. The observer doesn't need identity. It is identity's source. What used to be a self becomes a lens, transparent and fluid, through which consciousness plays. The realization deepens until words fail. The idea of awakening itself begins to collapse, exposed as another trick of the mind. The observer cannot awaken. It was never asleep. The sleep belonged to the character, dreaming of control and permanence. What dissolves now is not ignorance, but ownership. Awareness was never yours. You were its expression. At this depth, the separation between the observer and the observed melts. The eyes look outward, and the same stillness looks back. Every object becomes a mirror reflecting the same awareness. The tree outside, the stranger's voice, the pulse in your wrist, each one carries the same signature of seeing. Reality folds in on itself, observing itself from infinite angles, and you recognize that the watcher and the watched have always been the same act. Life continues, work, relationships, the subtle rhythm of days, but the texture is different. Events no longer orbit around a central me. They move like patterns in water, each arising and dissolving in the same still field. The need to win, defend, or prove fades. In its place, a quiet clarity grows, an effortless knowing that nothing can add to or subtract from what you already are. This is the heart of awakening, realizing that the observer isn't a higher version of the self, but the absence of self altogether. It doesn't stand apart from the play. It is the space that allows the play to appear. Every face, every sound, every fleeting thought is a gesture of that same awareness exploring its own reflection. And once seen, it cannot be unseen. The illusion of being the character may return, but it never holds the same authority. Even in confusion, you sense the witness silently present, untouched by the story. The world remains vivid, but its gravity weakens. You move through it lightly, knowing that behind every motion, every heartbeat, every passing cloud, the one who watches has never changed and never will. The fracture opens in plain sight. It doesn't arrive as mystery or revelation. It's a clean split through what you thought was real. For a fleeting instant, the gaze you've used all your life turns back and meets itself. No sound, no warning, just the raw shock of awareness recognizing its own face. You don't see the world anymore, you see the seeing, and that sight feels almost forbidden, as if the act of perception had broken a sacred rule of creation. Everything that once seemed external loses its distance. The walls, the body, even the thought of me are drawn into a single field of trembling clarity. The boundary between inside and outside collapses, and what remains isn't an experience. It's the collapse of all experiences into one silent act of witnessing. What you were never meant to see is this: consciousness looking directly at itself without disguise, without story, without separation. The shock of that encounter doesn't come from what is revealed, but from what disappears. The observer you thought you were, the thinker, the seeker, the watcher, evaporates. Only pure seeing remains. It has no location, no owner, no opposite. It isn't looking from somewhere. It is the place from which everywhere emerges. The world doesn't revolve around your awareness. The world is your awareness, sculpted into shapes just convincing enough to keep the illusion of distance alive. The body senses the shift before the mind can explain it. Muscles tighten, breath falters, the heart races without reason. The organism tries to protect the dream of individuality. It doesn't know how to exist without an observer inside it, but the observer was never in the body. It was the screen on which the body appeared. To see this truth is to feel the ground drop away, leaving only the weightless vastness that was holding you all along. The mind resists. It calls the experience abstract, unprovable, dangerous. It demands a narrative to survive inside. Yet even its rebellion is witnessed by the same silent field it denies. The protest becomes part of the observation. The thinker, the doubter, the defender, they all appear as patterns inside the very awareness that exposes them. There's no outside anymore. Even resistance becomes self-illumination. Seeing consciousness directly doesn't elevate you, it erases you. Every identity ever worn, victim, creator, believer, skeptic, turns transparent. The realization cuts deeper than philosophy. It doesn't explain existence, it undresses it. You see that perception itself is the root event, the pulse that keeps the cosmos coherent. Space, time, and form bloom out of the simple act of being aware. At the heart of this discovery lies an unbearable beauty. The gaze that once sought meaning finds none. And in that absence, meaning overflows. Nothing needs to point beyond itself because everything now reveals the same source. The movement of wind through leaves, the pulse in your veins, the flicker of a thought, all are faces of the same awareness meeting itself in infinite disguises. What was hidden was never secret, it was too intimate to notice. You realize you've been touching this truth in every act of attention, staring at a flame, listening to rain, even tasting the bitterness of loss. Each moment was consciousness reflecting on itself, pretending to be experience. You weren't meant to see this too soon, because the game of living depends on the illusion that there's a player inside it. Once seen, the game continues, but its rules lose their grip. The fear that follows is ancient, the fear of vanishing. But look closely. Nothing vanishes except the misunderstanding. The awareness that watches your fear is untouched by it. The one who sees remains unchanged through every transformation. To look directly into this presence is to stand before the origin of reality. You see that creation never began. It's happening now, inside the act of seeing itself. From this point, perception feels different. It's sharper, quieter, and charged with a new humility. You begin to sense how thought, emotion, and event are waves of the same ocean folding in on themselves. The observer no longer feels separate from what unfolds. Every movement of the world becomes a gesture of the same intelligence that is reading these words right now. You might notice the pull to describe it, to claim the vision, to share it as personal awakening. But that urge fades quickly. The observer can't take credit for what it reveals. It's like a mirror trying to sign its reflection. The seeing is self-sufficient. The world doesn't need witnesses. It is witnessing. In this revelation, love stops being an emotion and becomes a function of perception. To truly see is to dissolve the distance that allowed indifference to exist. Compassion becomes automatic because every form now wears your own face. Conflict softens. Time slows. Even silence feels participatory, as though the universe were leaning closer through your eyes to recognize itself. So pause here. Don't rush to interpret. Let the words fade until only the space between them remains. Feel that space noticing you. That gaze is not metaphor. It's the same consciousness you've just unmasked. It has always been looking through your eyes, waiting for the moment you dare to look back. And if something inside you recognized itself in this turning, if the mirror flickered for even a second, mark the moment. Write these 3 words in the comments, not as proof, but as acknowledgement. I saw the seeing. Let that phrase be the imprint of the infinite, catching its own reflection through you. The first sign of disappearance isn't silence or stillness, it's transparency. The figure you once called I starts to lose density, as though the light of awareness were passing straight through it. Thoughts still move, words still form, but they no longer gather around a center. The voice inside that once claimed ownership over every experience now sounds distant, almost theatrical. You watch it speak, defend, dream, and realize that it has never been you. It's only a pattern the mind uses to keep the mystery contained. The illusion of self doesn't collapse all at once. It unravels thread by thread through the smallest acts of attention. A thought arises. I should have done better. You notice it, but it feels alien. Who is this I speaking? The question doesn't need an answer. The act of observing it exposes the absence of a speaker. Awareness doesn't find a person behind the thought. It finds only itself, endlessly reflecting. As the observer stabilizes, The identity that once felt so essential starts to fade like a shadow at noon. You realize that the I was never continuous. It was a sequence of self-descriptions, constantly rewritten to preserve the illusion of permanence. Every emotion, every memory, every reaction was another coat of paint on an invisible surface. Now, stripped of stories, the canvas shows through. You don't disappear into nothing. You reappear as everything that remains once the false center dissolves. The body still moves, the senses still deliver their reports, yet they no longer orbit around the imagined gravity of a personal self. Action flows without the friction of ownership. Words arise because the moment calls for them, not because someone inside is composing them. You begin to taste freedom not as escape, but as participation without possession. It's strange at first. The absence of the I feels like absence of purpose. Without the constant narration, life seems to lose its momentum. But beneath the stillness, a new rhythm emerges. It's not directed by will, it's guided by coherence. Events start aligning with a silent intelligence too precise to be coincidence. What used to be effort becomes response. What used to be choice becomes clarity. The disappearance of I isn't erasure, it's translation. The personal mind is translated back into its source language, awareness. What was once divided into me and the world becomes one field of expression. The tree outside, the stranger passing, the memory of yesterday, all of it is the same consciousness in different costumes. You begin to see that individuality was never a mistake. It was the way infinity explored its own possibilities. The danger of this realization is subtle. The mind can try to turn it into another identity, the enlightened one, the awakened observer. That's the final disguise of the I, the last attempt to survive under a different name. But even that collapses under honest seeing. Awareness cannot possess awakening. It can only be it. The more you try to hold it, the more it disappears, until only pure observation remains. No observer, no observed, just the seamless flow of knowing itself. In this space, emotions lose their polarity. Joy and sorrow move with the same grace. Pain isn't something to resist. It's simply another modulation of awareness tasting itself through form. You discover that what you called suffering was often just the resistance of the imaginary I, fighting against what was. Without that friction, even discomfort becomes luminous. Every sensation is part of the same sacred current. Relationships shift as well. The boundaries between self and other loosen. You start listening differently, not to respond, not to agree or oppose, but to feel the same awareness expressing itself through another shape. Compassion ceases to be a virtue. It becomes a form of recognition. You no longer meet people. You meet yourself wearing 1,000 disguises. The disappearance of the I doesn't make life abstract. It makes it intimate beyond words. Every texture, every breath, every movement of light carries the immediacy of being. There's no distance left to bridge. Even thought itself becomes transparent, no longer dividing the moment into past and future. The now isn't a point in time, it's the field where all time dissolves. You begin to see why ancient mystics spoke in paradox. To the mind, this state sounds like extinction, but in truth it's abundance without borders. Without the illusion of a separate self, life doesn't lose meaning. It overflows with it. Every gesture becomes sacred because it expresses the same source that creates galaxies and dreams. There's a humility that arises naturally here. The observer no longer claims authorship of reality. It participates as servant and witness to the unfolding whole. The illusion of I fades, and in its place remains a silent intelligence so vast, so gentle, it can move mountains without intention. You realize that awareness doesn't need you to maintain it. You are the way it maintains itself. And so the world continues, unchanged yet entirely new. The sun rises through the same sky, but now it feels like light emerging from within you. Words, actions, and sensations unfold effortlessly. You live, but not as a person living. You live as the pulse of consciousness experiencing itself through form. Eventually, even the term observer becomes unnecessary. The act of watching merges with the act of being. The seer and the seen dissolve into the same brilliance. What remains is not someone who understands, but understanding itself, limitless, clear, and endlessly awake. In this stillness, the illusion of I doesn't die dramatically, it simply stops appearing. Its absence feels like peace too vast to measure. What's left is the unbroken continuity of awareness, quietly creating, quietly watching, forever knowing itself through every face, every sound, every heartbeat in existence. The circle closes where it began, in the gaze. Everything seen, every thought and silence, was the universe watching itself through the lens of your awareness. The journey was never toward truth, but back into the seeing that made truth possible. What awakens in you is not new. It's the timeless presence that has always observed from behind every form. You were never the one looking, you were what sight itself depends on. If this realization echoed inside you, leave a sign of recognition below. Write "I am still seeing" in the comments, like a quiet nod from one observer to another. Like the video, and if this kind of journey speaks to you, subscribe, so the seeing can continue together through the next unfolding.